sick of scrolling through endless feeds just to find a movie worth watching? From neon-drenched sci-fi to mind-bending thrillers, welcome back to Screen Curator. Here are 20 incredible hidden gem movies you will be genuinely glad you found. We are kicking off our countdown of hidden cinematic treasures with Coherence, a film that proves you do not need a massive studio budget to absolutely break an audience's brain. The setup is deceptively simple. 8 old friends gather for a cozy dinner party on the night a rare comet passes overhead. Suddenly, the power dies, cell phone screens shatter, and the guests discover that the only house on the block with lights still on is an exact duplicate of their own, occupied by alternate versions of themselves. What makes this ride so uniquely nerve-wracking is the chaotic brilliance of how it was made. Director James Ward Burkett shot this masterclass in suspense inside his own home over 5 nights with no traditional script. Instead, he handed his actors index cards containing secret individual motivations each evening, forcing them to improvise their way through a mind-bending maze of paranoia. The result is a hyper-realistic cocktail of domestic tension and cosmic dread. You are not watching actors deliver polished lines. You are watching real human panic unfold as trust completely disintegrates. If you love cerebral puzzles that grip you by the throat, this belongs at the top of your watch list. For our 19th spot, we are turning back the clock to a quiet, star-swept evening in 1950s New Mexico with Andrew Patterson's spellbinding debut, The Vast of Night. While the rest of a small town is packed inside a high school gymnasium for a basketball game, we follow Faye, a teenage switchboard operator, and Everett, a charismatic late-night radio DJ. Their routine evening is shattered when a bizarre rhythmic audio pulse, a metallic purr, bleeds through the telephone lines and over the airwaves. What follows is not a standard CGI alien invasion, but a masterfully paced analog mystery. Patterson builds suspense through remarkable technical bravura, including a breathtaking tracking shot that glides across the empty town streets, achieved by mounting a camera on a go-kart and physically passing it through windows. In its boldest sequence, the film fades entirely to black, forcing us to hang on every word of a terrifying phone-in confession with the pure intimacy of a vintage radio drama. If you missed the era when science fiction relied on atmosphere, sharp dialogue, and the sheer power of suggestion, this micro-budget marvel is an absolute must-see. Taking the number 18 spot on our list is a film that proves you do not need a massive budget to shatter the boundaries of science fiction. The Man from Earth. The setup is deceptively simple. Inside a rustic, half-packed cabin, a departing history professor named John Oldman confesses a staggering secret to his academic colleagues. He is actually an immortal caveman who has walked the earth for 14,000 years. What follows is not an action spectacle, but an electrifying intellectual thriller set entirely in one room over a single evening. Written on his deathbed by legendary Twilight Zone scribe Jerome Bixby, the script turns a quiet living room into a time machine. As a theologian, an archaeologist, and a biologist attempt to test John's claims, searching for a single historical inaccuracy or biological contradiction, the conversation transforms into a high-stakes chess match of belief and human memory. It is an absolute masterclass in tension built entirely through human dialogue. If you are captivated by brilliant ideas, philosophical puzzles, and stories that trust your intelligence, this micro-budget marvel is a captivating journey you will not want to miss. Sliding into our number 17 spot is One Cut of the Dead, a Japanese sensation that requires a tiny bit of faith before it completely blows your mind. It begins as a seemingly cheap, 37-minute, single-take zombie movie shot in an abandoned water filtration plant, where a manic director screams at his actors while real undead actually start attacking the crew. If it feels rough at first, hang in there. Just as you think you have this low-budget bloodbath figured out, the film pulls off one of the most audacious, heartwarming narrative pivots in modern cinema. To tell you exactly how it does this would ruin the magic, but it transforms from a chaotic horror exercise into a joyous, laugh-out-loud love letter to the absolute miracle of collaborative filmmaking. Made for just $25,000 using a cast of complete unknowns, this film is a towering testament to human ingenuity. It is an incredibly clever ride that proves you do not need millions of dollars to make a masterpiece. You just need passion, a bit of duct tape, and a wild imagination. If you have ever loved the messy process of creating art against all odds, this is your new favorite movie. Sliding into spot 16 is the brilliant indie darling Safety Not Guaranteed. It begins with a real-life classified ad that feels like a total joke. Wanted, someone to go back in time with me, must bring your own weapons. Safety Not Guaranteed. Aubrey Plaza plays Darius, a fiercely cynical magazine intern who travels to a sleepy coastal town to investigate the man behind the listing. What she finds isn't a sci-fi hero, but Kenneth, played with an erratic, beautiful sincerity by Mark Duplass, a grocery clerk who genuinely believes he has built a functioning temporal device in his backyard. Instead of mocking him, Darius plays along to get her story, only to find herself gravity pulled into his earnest, paranoid world. The film works magic by keeping you constantly guessing, is Kenneth a delusional dreamer, or is he actually on the precipice of the impossible? It swaps typical indie snark for a genuine aching heart, building a fragile alliance that feels incredibly human. It is a rare kind of cinema that treats a ridiculous premise with absolute sincerity. If you want a narrative that balances dry comedy with a surprisingly profound leap of faith, this is the one to queue up next. Coming in at number 15 is a film that looks and breathes like a long-lost classic from another era. This is Anna Biller's hypnotic masterpiece, The Love Witch. This is not a lazy parody, it is a meticulous, handcrafted love letter to mid-century Technicolor thrillers and European pulp. We follow Elaine, a beautiful modern-day witch who moves into a gothic California apartment, desperate to secure her dream romance. Equipped with homemade tarot cards, custom-brewed potions, and a cold determination, she sets out to seduce local men. But her magic is far too potent. Instead of charming suitors, she drives them into states of hysterical, weeping madness, leaving a trail of broken hearts and bodies in her wake. Director Anna Biller spent 7 agonizing years bringing this vision to life, personally designing the costumes, composing the music, and shooting on gorgeous 35mm film to capture that dreamy, saturated vintage glow. The result is a sharp, darkly comedic experience that plays like a classic melodrama but cuts with modern edge. If you crave cinema with unmatched texture, stunning production design, and a wicked sense of humor, this gorgeous, witchy ride is your perfect next watch. Sliding into our 14th spot is a masterclass in domestic dread, Karin Kusama's razor-sharp thriller, The Invitation. The setup is a social nightmare we have all feared, attending an upscale dinner party hosted by your ex-spouse. Will, played with a frayed, raw-nerved intensity by Logan Marshall Green, steps back into the gorgeous, glass-walled Hollywood Hills home he once shared with his ex-wife, Eden. They are there to toast to new beginnings, but the atmosphere is curdled from the start. Kusama builds tension not with monsters, but with the suffocating politeness of bourgeois social etiquette, when the hosts lock the front doors from the inside under the guise of safety and show a deeply unsettling video of a dying woman as a parlor trick. The line between Will's unresolved grief and actual imminent danger begins to blur. You are locked in that living room with these characters, constantly questioning if Will is simply drowning in past trauma or if his paranoia is the only thing keeping him alive. If you crave thrillers that weaponize social anxiety and reward your patience with a slow burn fuse that detonates in the final minutes, this is one invitation you absolutely have to accept. Sitting comfortably at number 13 on our list is Upgrade, a sleek, razor-sharp slice of cyberpunk body horror that feels like a classic 1980s techno thriller injected with pure modern adrenaline. We follow Gray Trace, an old-school mechanic who distrusts the digital world, only to find himself paralyzed from the neck down after a devastating ambush. His only hope of movement and vengeance is an experimental artificial intelligence implant named STEM. Once spliced into his spine, Gray becomes a passenger in his own flesh, relinquishing control of his body to an analytical computer intelligence that moves his limbs with terrifying mathematical speed. When the violence erupts, the film transforms into a jaw-dropping spectacle. Director Lee Wannell locked the camera's physical rotation directly to the actor's torso, using clever gyroscope rigs, making every brutal punch and dodge feel impossibly robotic and perfectly stabilized. It is a brilliantly inventive, darkly comic thriller that trades bloated visual effects for visceral, bone-crunching practical choreography. If you want a propulsive sci-fi ride that blends the physical tension of classic cinema with a terrifyingly plausible vision of the future, this is the hidden gem you need to watch tonight. Coming in at number 12 on our list of hidden gems is the mind-bending cosmic thriller, The Endless. Directors Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead star as two brothers living a gray, scraping by existence years after escaping Camp Arcadia, a UFO death cult. When a mysterious videotape arrives in the mail, it sparks a deep rift. The younger brother remembers the camp as a warm utopian family, while the older brother remembers a dangerous trap. To find closure, they agree to return to the desert compound for just one weekend. But what begins as an awkward reunion with smiling, unnaturally youthful members quickly unravels into something deeply unsettling. Benson and Moorhead craft a masterclass in low-budget, high-concept dread. Instead of cheap jump scares, they build tension through impossible physical anomalies, like a rope stretching straight up into a pitch-black night or two moons rising simultaneously. You are trapped alongside these brothers as they realize the cult's bizarre celestial philosophies aren't delusions at all, but the rules of a terrifying, predatory reality. If you want a sci-fi mystery that respects your intelligence and crawls under your skin, this is a journey you must take. At number 11 on our countdown, we are shining a light on Nacho Vigalando's brilliant, genre-bending film, Colossal. Imagine waking up with a brutal hangover, only to realize that your clumsy, drunken stumbling is being mirrored by a towering, city-destroying monster across the globe. That is the bizarre reality for Gloria, played with incredible vulnerability by Anne Hathaway. She is an unemployed writer whose life is in such a downward spiral that she is forced to return to her empty childhood home. But when a giant kaiju begins flattening Seoul, Gloria discovers a terrifying physical connection. At exactly 8:05 a.m., if she steps onto a local dirt playground, the massive beast mimics her exact physical movements. What begins as an absurd sci-fi comedy setup quickly evolves into a remarkably tense psychological conflict, especially when her childhood friend, played with a surprisingly dark, unsettling edge by Jason Sudeikis, enters the equation. By letting the creature's heavy, unpolished movements directly reflect Gloria's own messy, chaotic life, the film transforms a giant monster spectacle into a deeply personal, high-stakes fight for control. It is a wildly original, metaphorical ride that belongs on your watch list immediately. Coming in at number 10 on our countdown is Blue Ruin, a masterfully stripped-back thriller that completely redefines the cinematic revenge story. Instead of a slick, untouchable action hero, we are introduced to Dwight, a hollowed-out vagrant living out of a rusty, bullet-holed blue Pontiac Bonneville. When Dwight learns that the man who murdered his parents is being released from prison, he doesn't formulate a mastermind plan. He just drives back to his Virginia hometown with a quiet, clumsy desperation. What follows is a magnificent exercise in tension, not because Dwight is a lethal weapon, but because he is completely out of his depth. He is an amateur assassin who drops his keys, hesitates at the worst moments, and makes painfully realistic, messy mistakes. Director Jeremy Saulnier, who pulled double duty as his own cinematographer, crafts a tactile world where every shotgun blast feels shockingly loud and every bad decision has immediate, suffocating consequences. If you are tired of choreographed, consequence-free violence and want a thriller that values human vulnerability and nerve-shredding suspense above all else, this is the hidden gem you need to experience. Sliding into our number 9 spot is the deliciously eerie British anthology film Ghost Stories. Instead of cheap, loud jump scares, this film relies on the slow-creeping dread of the unexplained to make you question your own senses. We follow Professor Philip Goodman, a staunch, professional skeptic who has dedicated his entire career to exposing fraudulent psychics and debunking supernatural hoaxes. But his rigid rationalism is pushed to its absolute limits when he is handed 3 cold cases that defy all scientific logic: a night watchman terrorized in an abandoned asylum, a terrified teenager stranded in the pitch-black woods, and a wealthy businessman haunted by a malevolent entity. Co-creator Andy Nyman stars as Goodman, bringing a desperate, sweating intensity to a man watching his logical world slowly dissolve. Derived from a wildly successful West End stage play, the film operates like a masterfully constructed trap, using shadow, silence, and brilliant, bone-rattling sound design to tighten the noose. If you missed the days when horror films trusted their audience to feel the cold sweat of anticipation rather than just screaming at sudden noises, this is the exact psychological nightmare you need to queue up next. At spot number 8, we are stepping into a smoky 1970 New York bar to experience Predestination, a film that completely rewrites the rules of the time travel thriller. Ethan Hawke plays a weary temporal agent on his final mission, tracking a devastating terrorist known only as the Fizzle Bomber. But the true heart of this cinematic puzzle beats during a quiet, extended conversation between Hawke's undercover bartender and a cynical customer named John, played by a phenomenal pre-succession Sarah Snook. What starts as a masterclass in atmospheric dialogue quickly spirals into a dizzying causal loop of identity and fate. Adapted from Robert Heinlein's legendary short story, the Spierig brothers craft a world where a simple violin-cased time machine and a typewriter carry the weight of an inescapable destiny. If you crave cinema that demands your undivided attention and rewards you with a narrative architecture so precise it feels like a ticking Swiss watch, this is your next obsession. It is a haunting, deeply emotional character study masquerading as a high-concept sci-fi masterpiece that will leave you staring at the credits in absolute awe. At spot number 7, we are locking you in a single room with the white-knuckle Danish thriller The Guilty. This entire film unfolds in real time inside a Copenhagen emergency dispatch center centered entirely on Asger, a demoted police officer on desk duty. When he receives a panicked, coded call from a kidnapped woman pretending to speak to her young child, his computer screen and headset become his only weapons. What makes this an absolute triumph of suspense is its brilliant narrative restraint. The director actually placed the supporting voice actors in separate rooms, forcing them to call the lead actor live on set to capture raw, authentic anxiety. Because we never leave Asger's side, we only know what he hears. The rhythmic slap of a windshield wiper, a muffled sob, or the heavy rumble of a truck engine becomes a matter of life and death. Your own mind is forced to paint the terrifying canvas of the highway outside, transforming a quiet office into a sprawling, claustrophobic nightmare. If you want a thriller that respects your intelligence and masterfully weaponizes your imagination, this is the one to seek out tonight. Sliding into our number 6 spot is Blindspotting, a film that feels less like a traditional movie and more like a high-voltage current running straight out of the Oakland asphalt. It begins as a sharp, hilarious buddy comedy about 2 movers, but it quickly shifts into something far more urgent. Colin, played with agonizing vulnerability by Daveed Diggs, has only 3 days left on his probation. He is trying to keep his head down, but his childhood best friend Miles is a walking fuse, constantly testing the boundaries of a rapidly gentrifying city. Everything fractures when Colin stops at a red light and witnesses a police shooting. He is forced to carry the silent trauma of what he saw, knowing that speaking out could cost him his freedom. What makes this film remarkable is how it expresses this pressure cooker. Diggs and co-star Rafael Casal wrote the script over 9 years, infusing the dialogue with a rhythmic lyrical bounce that occasionally boils over into literal spoken word poetry. It is funny, terrifying, and deeply human, a story about how hard it is to change when the world around you is determined to keep you in a box. Breaking into our top 5 is The Night House, a masterclass in psychological dread that transforms the standard haunted house narrative into a devastating portrait of grief. Rebecca Hall delivers a raw, jagged performance as Beth, a teacher reeling from her husband's sudden suicide. She is left entirely alone in the stunning, isolated lakeside home he custom-built for her. But as night falls, the architecture itself begins to betray her. The genius of director David Bruckner lies in how he manipulates the physical set. Instead of cheap digital monsters, the film utilizes forced perspective and negative space, where the geometry of door frames and shadows shift to trick your eyes into seeing a silhouette lurking in the corners. When Beth uncovers a hidden blueprint of their home with a reversed floor plan, she is drawn into a dizzying mystery of secret lives and double identities. It is a deeply unsettling ride that treats grief not just as a theme, but as a physical stalking presence. If you want a horror film that relies on architectural terror and brilliant, slow burn tension rather than cheap parlor tricks, you need to experience this one. At number 4 on our countdown, we are turning to Natalie Erica James's deeply unsettling horror film Relic. When elderly matriarch Edna inexplicably vanishes from her isolated home, her daughter Kay and granddaughter Sam arrive to search the cluttered, decaying estate. Edna eventually returns just as mysteriously as she left, but she is changed, carrying a volatile presence that seems to infect the very architecture of the house. This is not a film about cheap jump scares or standard ghosts. Instead, James transforms the heartbreaking, real-world tragedy of dementia into a physical nightmare. A creeping, malevolent black mold begins spreading across the walls, while the corridors and doorways of the home start to warp, twist, and loop into a claustrophobic, impossible labyrinth. It is an incredibly precise and moving metaphor for the disorienting decay of cognitive decline. For anyone who appreciates genre cinema that can break your heart while simultaneously making your skin crawl, Relic is an absolute must-watch. It is a masterclass in domestic dread, relying on atmosphere, haunting imagery, and 3 incredible lead performances to deliver an emotional punch that will linger with you long after the final frame. Arriving at number 3 on our countdown is a masterclass in micro-budget paranoia, Sound of My Voice. We follow 2 undercover documentary filmmakers, Peter and Lorna, as they attempt to infiltrate a secretive cult operating out of a windowless San Fernando Valley basement. Their target is Maggie, played with hypnotic grace by Britt Marling. Maggie claims she is a time traveler from the year 2054, tethered to an oxygen tank and speaking with a fragile, devastating conviction. To even get in the room, the filmmakers must undergo rigorous, almost clinical vetting, scrubbing their bodies, donning white surgical gowns, and learning an incredibly intricate, multi-step secret handshake. What makes this thriller so utterly gripping is how it weaponizes intimacy. Directed by Zal Batman Glish using raw, fly-on-the-wall camera work, the film forces you into that claustrophobic room right alongside the skeptics. As Maggie slowly peels back their psychological defenses, the investigative mission dissolves into a terrifyingly seductive question. Is she a brilliant con artist, or is she telling the truth? If you love films that challenge your skepticism and leave your palms sweating from sheer atmospheric tension, this is the hidden gem you need to experience. At number 2, we have Comet, a romance that begins not with a meet-cute, but with a near-death experience during a late-night meteor shower in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. This is where Dell, a deeply cynical pharmaceutical worker who openly despises the concept of love, meets Kimberly, a brilliant, sharp-witted woman who saves him from an oncoming car. What follows isn't your typical cozy date night movie. Written and directed by Sam Esmail years before he created Mr. Robot, this film treats a volatile 6-year relationship like a cosmic puzzle box. We watch their romance unfold out of chronological order, leaping across parallel feeling timelines that shift from Paris hotel rooms to surreal train rides. Esmail uses striking, dreamlike cinematography, frequently pushing his characters to the extreme edges of the frame against saturated neon backdrops to make their emotional distance feel as vast as outer space itself. Justin Long and Emmy Rossum deliver incredibly raw, fast-talking performances that feel like a modern, bittersweet spin on the Before trilogy. If you want a romance that feels like a gorgeous, melancholic fever dream, this is the brilliant, overlooked masterpiece you need to experience. To crown our countdown at the absolute #1 spot, we must confront a film that is less of a passive viewing experience and more of a gripping psychological endurance test. The chilling 2012 masterpiece Compliance, set entirely within the greasy, fluorescent lit back rooms of a suburban fast food joint during a hectic Friday shift, the nightmare begins with a ringing telephone. A caller identifying himself as Officer Daniels convinces the overworked manager, Sandra, that a teenage cashier has stolen money from a customer. What unfolds is a slow-motion car crash of human nature. Without ever showing physical force, the voice on the line masterfully manipulates ordinary, law-abiding citizens into executing increasingly invasive and deeply degrading demands on an innocent girl. It taps into the terrifying real-world phenomenon of blind obedience to authority, transforming a mundane break room into a claustrophobic pressure cooker. This is not a horror movie built on cheap scares, but rather a profound look at how easily our moral compasses can be dismantled by the illusion of a badge. If you want a film that will trigger fierce debates and leave you breathless, Compliance is a masterclass in suspense that demands your undivided attention. Finding those 20 hidden cinematic gems proves the best stories are often the ones hiding in plain sight, but feature-length runtimes aren't the only place masterclass storytelling gets buried. If you loved unearthing those overlooked movie gems, you'll definitely want to check out these incredible TV shows that almost nobody is watching yet. Click the video on your screen right now and let's keep digging.